All right, so we are going to get started just slowly. I won't get into any of the meat of it for another minute or two, but that's enough silence for now. So thank you everybody for coming. We appreciate your time. I think it's obvious that this is a really important topic. We've had a lot of great response. We did a very similar webinar for Salesforce a couple of weeks ago. Had a great audience there, and then the same goes for NetSuite. So really looking forward to the call today, and we hope that you all get something out of it. We're scheduled here for about 30 minutes. I'll walk you through a quick agenda. So we'll start with some introductions. I'll do those right now. So my name is Paul Spaz. I'll be leading the webinar for today. I lead the sales team here at Strongpoint. I've been with the company for a few years. Work with a variety of customers, partners, consultants, you name it. So I've kind of seen all different shapes and sizes of NetSuite instances through their eyes, I guess. And so I'll be walking you through the webinar today. Appreciate your time, like I've said a couple of times now. And so from here, the agenda for the day, we'll talk quickly just about what is technical debt. Talk about a definition. I love analogies. If you've been on any webinars with me before or even sales calls, I use them all the time. So I've got one here to help describe technical debt in kind of my own words. And then so from there, we'll transition into a single slide on managing technical debt. I don't think that there is really a solution to the problem per se, but I think that there are a number of strategies that everybody can use. From, I think the smallest customer on here has something like 27 employees. We've got some very large partners and some very large customers here as well. So NetSuite instances of all size can put in place some of these strategies, or even in some cases all of these strategies to help them manage technical debt. It definitely will be an ongoing challenge, not a solution that will just be fixed and go away, but we'll see if we can share some best practices, just broadly and generally speaking. And then what I'll do is dig in a little bit more detail and share about a 5 or 10 minute demo with you. And so from there, I'm not going to go through in a lot of detail or get very granular in the product, but I just kind of wanted to highlight some of the ways that we help streamline and automate the strategies that I cover in number 3. So you can do them on your own for the most part, maybe not very efficiently though in a lot of cases, and I'll show you instead how we help automate them for you. And that'll be kind of the agenda for the day. So if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A up above or into the chat box. Either way, I'll do my best to kind of pay attention to them on the go, but I will also do my best to save time towards the end to help answer any of them that I may not have covered during the session. So like I said, we're scheduled for 30 minutes. I'll try to keep things relatively high level and just share some good best practices with you, and I'll do my best to be done on time. So like I said, I like analogies, and we'll get started. So what is technical debt? Well, really, the definition would be additional cost of making new improvements arising from previous implementation decisions. So you've gone on, you've worked on projects, you've made customizations inside your system to meet your business requirements, and then now you've got new challenges to make. And the level of difficulty to resolve those, or the cost or the time required to resolve those and meet your new challenges, is actually higher because of what you've done previously. So the more customized your system is, the more difficult it is to continue managing and building on top of it. And so, like I said, I've got this headless person up on the screen pushing a snowball. I thought it made a lot of sense, because the more that you push that snowball, the more that it rolls, the bigger that it grows, the heavier that it gets. So the more changes, the more customizations, the more releases, the more projects, the more that you do on NetSuite, the heavier that it becomes to manage. And ultimately, that's kind of what we're here to talk about today, is just generally speaking, some best practices that we can share and some strategies. And then I'll share a short demo with you to help you push that snowball even when it gets really, really big. I thought it was a decent analogy. It was a new one for us here today. So what causes technical debt? All right, the first two are really, in a way, a benefit, which is kind of weird, right? But you're working on the NetSuite platform, and one of the biggest benefits are how customizable it is, right? You can do so much on the platform, and a lot of it is extremely valuable, right? How can you customize a system to meet your requirements globally in all kinds of different environments with all kinds of little unique quirks. How can you customize a system to do it? I think one of our customers operates in more than 300 countries, or maybe 300 different subsidiaries, and so how can you customize your system in a way to meet all of those requirements? And you know, that's really, you know, both a challenge to do, but it's also a blessing that you're able to do it even in the first place. And so it's the ease of customization that causes technical debt, but then at the same time, it's also a really valuable thing to have. So you don't want to shy away from it, and you do want to go off and be able to customize, but that does lead to problems downstream. So we often come across companies who've been using NetSuite for many years, and one thing that we often see is that throughout their time on the platform, there have been very significant changes to their business processes. And so just because you did something one way 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 years ago does not mean that that's the way that it's done today. And so as a result, there's often rework, right? Changes need to be made, additions need to be made, things need to be deleted. But that also, over time, like that snowball, right? It builds up and it builds up, and it makes the platform more difficult for you to manage overall. And leading into the next point, sometimes when you're scaling, you're moving quickly, there's changes to business processes, there may be urgency, and workarounds may need to be required. And so as a result, you're not always necessarily going to plan things out as well as you may have liked. Things might need to be done quickly, and as a result, you sometimes maybe don't delete things, or you don't change things, you just add something new because it's a little bit less complex sometimes. And the result of that is, you know, yes, you're able to do things maybe more quickly, but then in the end, you've got more to deal with downstream. Second to last point here really does cover some of that same stuff too, right? Where, you know, as you're scaling and you're moving really quickly, yes, there's urgency. You sometimes need to bring in partners to help you scale up and meet business goals in a timely manner, in a way that, you know, you can't do all by yourself. But then once that partner is done, if they don't stay on with you, then you're left managing the work that they've done. And so you don't necessarily have that intimate knowledge of what's being built. And then that same principle applies for turnover as well. So you've got people who have been with the company for a long time, have an intimate knowledge of what's going on inside the system and how it's built and how things are being used, the processes that they're supporting, all the dependencies. But then if those people either move into a new role or they move on to a new company, you lose that tribal knowledge. And so that's a real challenge around technical debt, because you no longer understand the customizations and dependencies. And like I said, the processes they support and so on and so forth. And so it makes it much harder for you to operate. And then again, you're a lot more likely to not change things or to not delete things because you don't fully understand what they're doing. And that's where you get into, again, just adding and adding and adding and adding and adding. Now, the last piece, and I think that this is, you know, a natural result of a fast-paced growing business that's scaling rapidly, but you sometimes have a lack of overall governance and strategy. You know, 7 years ago when you first got NetSuite and you were a lot smaller than you are today, maybe you didn't plan all of this out as well as you wish you had. And so you don't have those kind of underlying best practices and principles that have been built in from the start. And that also significantly increases it. Different naming conventions, different processes, different people leading, and not always in the exact same direction. So this is definitely not an all-encompassing list. A number of things can cause technical debt or over-customization, if you want to think about it that way as well. But they will all have a very broad impact on your business. And ultimately, you're looking at things like a lack of productivity. Potentially it's, you know, downtime. You're looking at increased costs as the definition suggested, right? So lots of impacts broadly across the business. And if you can really kind of get this under wraps and figure out how to manage the environment within a heavily customized instance, then you'll be much better off. And that kind of leads into the next slide here. So, you know, one step to help you manage technical debt, I think probably the most obvious would be cleanup and optimization. Variety of ways for you to tackle this. You can look at safe searches, unused customizations, unused automation, things like help fields and descriptions, which may impact the end user experience. And that list would definitely go on. There's all kinds of ways that you can clean up your instance. one recommendation that we have is to systemize as much as you possibly can. It's going to make for a smoother process, a more successful project overall. And the last thing that you want to do is to embark on a cleanup project and end up frying your system because you deleted the wrong things. It's a very dangerous game to be playing. So you want to make sure that you're following a process that's been well thought through, and you're doing the right kind of research and analysis and planning along the way, making sure that you're not impacting end users in any way. But cleanup is obviously a really big one. But how many people actually have time to go in and work through a cleanup project? That number is pretty limited. Some people do embark on that, and you know, a lot of the time partners might be brought in to help support those initiatives. Cleanup and optimization, it is important, but not at the expense of your other business goals, right? You can't ignore the rest of your backlog while you go off and clean things up. You need to be effectively managing that backlog, delivering value to the business while you are cleaning up. And so that's really why cleanup can actually be very challenging. And this is why you really, if you're going to do it, you need to find ways to automate it, to be able to take that low-hanging fruit and knock it off really quickly so that you can keep up with everything else going on. And so I'll share some strategies there with you inside our system in just a minute or two. But cleanup is obviously a very big one. So the next kind of best practice that I would say to help you manage technical debt is really around automating your system documentation and the way that analysis is done. So important for a couple reasons. I say here a single source of truth. And then the second bullet point is talking about enabling SMEs, admins, BAs, you know, really everybody across the board. So we do run across some customers that are using external code repositories, and they might call those their single source of truth. But if they aren't accessible to everybody, then it's not really a single source of truth. And so that's why you need to have documentation and, you know, processes or tools for analysis that are available to everybody and that can be, you know, understood by less technical people, not only because it helps you prioritize your time and have your technical experts working on more technical things, but also just because it makes for a much more even playing field and increases productivity across the board. So you need to have documentation of your system. You need to know what's in there. And the upkeep of that should be automated using software, because that's going to make sure, first of all, that it's accurate, that it's always up to date, but it does make it more accessible too. So the third and fourth points here are really around just making sure that not only do you understand what's in your system, but you need to have ways to understand what it's all connected to and how it's being used. Right? It's one thing to go off and delete an unused customization. It's another thing to go off and delete an unused customization that has a long list of dependencies, because now you potentially have just impacted all kinds of other stuff in your system without knowing it. Or even worse, you know, maybe things aren't going to break, but maybe they're just going to be different, which is a really scary place to be. And so that's really, again, leading into the impact analysis, is making sure that you have ways to understand risk, to understand complexity, taking in not only technical risk, am I going to break something, but also, you know, organizational risk. Am I going to impact somebody's work? Am I going to impact somebody's data? Very, very important things to consider when thinking of impact analysis. And one thing that's really important, I think, about all of the above is that it's included in a process. So whether you're a small company or a large company, people should not be doing this kind of work ad hoc. It should be a step within a process that is repeatable across the board by everybody in the company that's helping you manage this system. So that'd be number 10 at 2. Number 3 is what we call, you know, governance and review. You can also think of this as compliance maybe, but you know, ultimately more proactively, you do want to take some time to establish standards and conventions of, you know, how you're going to do things. You know, some people think of this as being time consuming or slow, but when it comes down to it, you're actually going to be enabling productivity and people are going to be more successful long term. So you need to sometimes slow down to move more quickly. And so taking some time to set that up, to have a change review process in place, to figure out a way to manage your backlog intelligently or effectively, those are all things that are going to help you move more quickly. You know, how do you prioritize projects? You know, that's a really important question, I think, to have an answer to. because I don't think that there's very many NetSuite systems out there where you've got, more resources than requirements. It's typically the other way around, where you do need to prioritize, and how you do that can make a big difference. And then finally, conducting regular reviews and audits. And so a lot of customers out there, whether they're publicly traded or in a regulated environment, they have to do these things. They have to maintain visibility to what's changing inside their system. Other companies don't necessarily have to, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't. So best practice is absolutely to keep visibility of what's going on. But the big challenge is, how can you separate the needle from the haystack, right? How can you understand only the changes that are critical, that are potentially impacting automation, as an example? How can you just keep visibility to those and make sure that you are kind of doing some review of what's going on inside the system? So like I said at the start, I don't think that there's necessarily a solution to technical debt. Not going to go away forever just because you've done cleanup and optimization. You need to likely have a more holistic strategy than that, doing some cleanup, having ways to operate within an environment that's heavily customized. I can be productive even though my system is complex, and then having strategies to help minimize it long term. So proactive planning, and then reactively reviewing changes that are taking place to help make sure that you're kind of managing that technical debt effectively. Okay, so that's kind of, 1, 2, 3, a little bit of what I'm going to show you today. I'll jump into the environment. I'll probably have about a 10-minute overview, like I said, not showing you too much detail, but I'll talk a little bit about what we do to help you automate cleanup so that you can stay on top of it without it taking up too much of your time. I'll show you some of our documentation and impact analysis tools, how everybody can have access to better information about what's in the system. And I'll talk a little bit about, how we would help you review only the critical and risky changes to help stay on top of any exceptions or things that might have fallen through the cracks. So I'll jump over into NetSuite here. So for those that aren't very familiar with Strongpoint, we're a managed bundle. You install our tool. In a couple of days, we'll index the entire environment. We're going to return to you fields, forms, critical settings, preferences, user roles, assignments, scripts and workflows, and all the way down to a very granular level. So like every line of code inside your scripts and every subcomponent of your workflows, we'll capture all of that. And then we'll also go through and map out dependencies so you can understand the links between or among those customizations. So like I said, the first thing I'm going to show you is a little bit about cleanup. So a quick overview of the menus here. You can see inside the cleanup tab that we've got unused customizations, unused scripts, inactive owners, default script IDs. We've got script management tools to look at utilization and errors and all kinds of detailed information about the performance of the scripts inside your system. The first tool that I'm going to show you is one that I think is particularly useful when you're looking at cleaning up while you're keeping up with the speed of your business. So this is our automated SafeSearch cleanup tool. Really useful. Variety of filters that you can set, rules that you can build. So for example, in this one here, I've said 18 months where a search has gone unused, doesn't belong to these specific people, doesn't have any of these complex dependencies. We want to automatically archive it. Really useful way to stay on top of safe searches inside the instance, which can sometimes balloon up into the thousands. You've got multiple versions of the same thing. Everybody has a harder time understanding what the right one to use is. This is a good way for you to stay on top of that. Also really helps with things like inactive owners as well. So what's owned by somebody that isn't active anymore. And then there's a workflow that's built in behind the scenes here where we'll automatically alert the owners and let them know that we're going to archive it unless they want to opt out. And then you can choose to actually have this continue running. So every time a new search reaches that 18-month mark, it would automatically kick off this process for you. And it would send off an email to the owner letting them know that we're going to archive it for them unless they want to do something about it. So you spend a little bit of time cleaning this up and you can go a really long way in reducing the overall clutter of safe searches inside the environment. So a second example that I'll show you here is our unused customization search. So really straightforward search capability here for you. I'll just select, you can filter in a few different ways. I'm going to go by type here, and I'll say just select body fields. So what this is now going to show me is any unused body fields inside my instance. And so it's going to list them all out here for me. It's going to be name, type, parent, date last used, and then on the far right here, I would be seeing any kind of dependencies. So if I scroll down here, I'll see a few scripts here, some searches that are connected as an example. So it's a great way for me all in one place to understand the, like I said, dependencies, but overall risk involved with deleting any of these customizations. So great way for you to identify that low-hanging fruit in a short period of time and stay on top of it. Not being used, hasn't been used in years, no dependencies, maybe the owner is inactive now. This is something that's really easy to clean up. I can do it quickly and confidently. But as I mentioned, you do want to systematize these things as much as possible. And so that's why we've got our cleanup status tab. So you'd be able to go through and select from various different statuses, such as to be cleaned up or archived or under investigation. So a few different opportunities here for you. And then what you can do is report against those statuses. So I want to see every customization that I have said needs to be deleted. And you can pull up that on a report and you can go off and you can delete them. You can add it into a change request, which I'll cover shortly, and go into more detail on it. So one thing to identify the unused customizations and say these are great candidates for cleanup. And then it's another thing to help you with the process to actually delete it safely. It's really important stuff. So I'm now going to kind of segue into that bullet number 2, which was giving you tools for automated documentation and analysis. So as I said, Strongpoint's a managed bundle. You install, it'll document everything for you. And then on an ongoing basis, it's going to automatically update itself daily at a scheduled time, off hours, or whatever you might set it up to do. And then what that's going to do is not only keep tabs on what your current documentation is, the current configuration of your system, but it's also going to create change logs or diffs for any time something's changed. So not only does it give you visibility to what things are like today, but it gives you unparalleled visibility into kind of what things were like before. So one of the most common tools that we have is our entity relationship diagram. So I'm going to come down here, scroll through the list, and I'll pick our customer standard record. I'll hit show ERD. And so Strongpoint's going to populate anything that sits on the customer record for me. And then I can go through and get information. So for example, let's say I want to look into this company size entity field. It's going to branch out and show me anywhere that it's being used inside my system. So I can see dependencies, and then I can dig in further from there. So for example, there's 2 searches here that are using this list. If I open up this demo search as an example, I can open up a record. And this is something that Strongpoint has created to store information about configuration and usage. And I can dig in here. I can see that there are no formulas inside this search. I can see the filters and I can see the fields. Down below, I can see the date last used, the subsidiaries using it, and the employees that are using the customization as well. So great way for me to understand, okay, what is this doing? What's it connected to? Who's using it? When was it last used? A different example that I'll share with you here. So we've got another field down here, a checkbox. It's connected through to a workflow, connected downstream to a couple scripts and a search. So a much more complex picture for you here. So first of all, there's some risk. You probably don't want to make this change. Speaking of kind of customization, right? So now if I open up this record instead, I'm looking at a workflow instead of a search. So I'm getting an overview of its configuration, seeing the related objects or dependencies up here. But what I'm also seeing is change logs. So Strongpoint is automatically creating time-stamped, date-stamped records of any changes that have happened along the way, which is extremely useful in trying to track history of kind of what's going on. Okay. Now, one of the things I talked about back on my slides is making sure that these tools are accessible to everybody. They're easy to understand, and I think that's really what this visual representation does, right? You don't need to be a developer to understand that there's risk and complexity here, and you can dig in and you can understand usage by looking at things like date last used all in one place in a standardized format across the board for all of the customizations that we've documented. It's pretty useful stuff. So the next step to this, though, is that there are ways to automate this more, and that's really what we do within our change request. There's other ways to do it, but this is definitely a great example. So our change request is, I think, very standard, right? You're going to provide an overview of what you're doing and give it a name and comment on the project that it's linked to. But then what's really unique is that you're actually going to select the customizations that are in scope for change here. And what Strongpoint's going to do is, based on some predefined policies that you've created or we've created with you, it's going to automatically tell you the change control level that's required. It's going to give you an overview of the approvers that are required, and it's going to give you an impact analysis down below so that you can understand what of these 3 customizations can be safely deleted or modified, and which ones cannot be safely deleted or modified. And in the cases where it can't, it's going to give you warnings and a list of impacted customizations. So this is about operating effectively within a heavily customized environment, right? Yes, my instance is old. Yes, it's customized. I have all kinds of technical debt and unused customizations, but this gives you a great map, a great roadmap of, where is the risk? What do I need to be aware of, and what do I need to do? And we've got change requests and approvals, so this can be integrated within your change management process. We also do integrate with external tools such as JIRA and ServiceNow, showing you that now. So within a JIRA ticket, for those that are familiar with it, you're also able to select customizations, and you're even able to click through, say, view the ERD, or actually access an impact analysis right within here. So I'm seeing my couple different fields and my warnings and the impacted customizations all within my JIRA ticket. And so if you're relying on that JIRA process, we can integrate within it end to end. It's part of a process. It's repeatable, something that people are really going to continue using. So I won't talk about that too much more now, but I'm happy to explain in more detail at a later date. So the last couple things I'll comment on is really now that 3rd bullet point that I shared around how do you automate governance and review. And one of the things that I think is most important here is having a way to identify critical changes, risky changes, and complex things. And you saw those warnings in the impact analysis there, and that's really what's driving it, or what's in front of you is what's driving it. So we have change controls or change policies that you can create, helping you understand what process should be followed for different types of changes. So scripted objects, as an example, require a more thorough change process than changes to searches and reports, as an example, or critical settings and preferences, or user roles, or assignments, or whatever the case may be. And so by setting up these rules, it's basically giving our tool some intelligence and allowing it to understand what you think is risky in your environment. And you can customize these in a variety of ways, all the way down to setting specific components under specific change controls. So for example, I might not care about searches and reports being changed except for these 7 reports, and those ones can have special change processes required. And so then you'll be advised of that risk proactively inside your change requests, potentially very early in the process, which is always great in helping you manage within a customized environment. But then, as I'm showing you now, we've also got what we call a non-compliant change report, which is basically just going to be a running list of any changes that have happened inside your system that violated those controls that you set up and didn't follow the appropriate process. So if you said, for example, that any changes to scripted objects require an approved change request, and somebody makes a change that impacts a scripted object, either directly or through a dependency, and it doesn't have a change request, it would show up on this report. So if it violates a rule and it doesn't follow process, we would highlight it for you. And so that's a great way from going from hundreds or thousands of changes that you need to review down to a much smaller number of them. And then from here, just like in the cleanup that I showed you earlier, we'll want to have a way for you to understand what has changed, the risk that's involved, and then you can work through and actually complete a resolution and close them off and remove them from this list so that you can better understand, the newer changes that are happening and keep that list as short as you can. So, I hope that was a useful overview. Kind of done the demo here for today. I'll quickly share my screen again. So these are the 3 points that we covered, right? How can you manage within a customized or complex environment? And the best way to do it is to clean up where you can without it impacting too much of your time, to ensure that you've got a single source of truth that's accessible to everybody so everyone can understand the risk and complexity that's involved. And then finally, you'll want to have some kind of a governance overview process to follow. So I hope that was useful. I'm going to go through some questions now. We do have a couple that came in. So the first one is, what if a search is used by a schedule script or something other than a suitelet? Would your search cleanup tool catch that? And so the answer is yes, it would. So both the inactive customization search, the SafeSearch cleanup does look at dependencies of a variety of different types. The customer success manager would be able to walk you through all of that, but we would absolutely catch other scripts, not just in a suitelet. Next question is, are you able to segment just or does employees using include inactive employees? And so I'm not sure what the context for that one was, but in the SafeSearch cleanup as an example, you would be able to filter by inactive employees, or in the unused customization cleanup, you can also look at inactive employees there as well and filter just by them. So yeah, there are a few different ways to run through that. And that was it for questions. So finishing up right on time. Thanks everybody. I think it is a really important topic. We're getting a lot of interest in it, which is great. And I think that my message to kind of send you all home with is just that there isn't necessarily a solution for technical debt, but there are definitely strategies to help you be productive in an environment that is customized and complex. And I think that that's what we're here to help you with. So if you're interested in learning more, please let us know. We will send out a recording of this, and we'll look forward to being back in touch with you soon. Thanks, everyone. Hope you have a great day.